Welcome to Elected, a podcast for women and our active accomplices in and around Canadian politics. I'm your host, Sarah Elder-Chamanara, and today my guest is Katie Gibbs. In the spirit of hello. Before we get started, I'll just take a moment to say that in the spirit of reconciliation, it's important to me to share my personal commitment to learning the history of colonialism and the ongoing systemic violence and oppression against Indigenous peoples. The land where I live, work, and record from is the traditional territories of the Blackfoot Confederacy, the Siksika, Kainai, Piikani, the Tsuut'ina, Stoney Nakoda Nations, Métis Nation Region 3, and all people who make their homes in the Treaty 7 region of southern Alberta. So, hi, Katie.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here. As you can see, I'm a big Madame Premier fan.
Yeah.
One of my t-shirts on right now.
Is that the political animal in Navy?
It is, yes.
You know, I think that's like, I think I've only ever done like a few things in blue, but it's hard not to. Sometimes there are just too many colors and too many good colors.
Yes. Well, it's one of my faves. I've basically been living in Madame Premier t-shirts. That was part of my pandemic live at home wardrobe.
Did you wear them on the campaign trail too?
A little bit less, on the campaign, it was the first time in 2 years where I wore real clothes again. So a little bit less, but now I'm back to my uniform of sweatpants and Madame Premier t-shirts.
Lovely. Well, I appreciate the support. So talking about the campaign trail, this is the meat or the heart of our conversation today. So you just ran in the recent Ontario provincial election for the Ontario Liberals. Mm-hmm. And during the campaign, I was on Twitter one day and had seen a tweet or tweets actually that you had shared. And I'll just get them up. And so then we can, so you had said, "There's one question I get asked every day that I was not expecting. Every single day I get asked multiple times how old I am. More than my background, more than my party affiliation, and more than my policy positions." And then you went on to say, "This is a problem in our political environment. I highly doubt a man of my age would be asked that question, and no one would imply or suggest that a man's appearance or age disqualifies their experience. For those wondering, I'm 38. I'm a mother of 2 children. I have a PhD in biology from UO. I co-founded a national organization that I ran as the ED for a decade. I have almost 20 years experience fighting climate change, and I've served on many other boards." And then you go on to say, for context, Yasir Naqvi?
Yasir Naqvi, yeah.
Was 34 when he was first elected as the MPP for Ottawa Centre. He was never asked how old he was. Pierre Poilievre was first elected in Ottawa at the age of 25. Scheer was also first elected at 25. Women make up 51% of the population in Ontario, yet they hold only 40% of the seats at Queen's Park. In the House of Commons, women only hold 31% of the seats. Women across our province are underrepresented at every level of government. We all need to do more to elect women running for office. It starts by acknowledging the double standard that those who step up to run face. As a mentor and inspiration of mine, Catherine McKenna has said, "Add women, change politics. This is needed now. This is needed more now than ever." Yes. Yes. There are probably anyone who's listening, yes, agrees with you completely. So tell me about those experiences on the doors and what, how many, I'm sure you didn't count an exact number, but, how many times were you generally asked that? How consistently? And then what other questions did you get?
Yeah, I mean, I was really hesitant to even tweet that and to bring it up, but it was something I was asked or brought up at the doors every single day. Early on, it was more just generic comments about how young I looked. And I kind of developed, it came up so so often, like I kind of had to develop a, standard answer to it. So, every single day, multiple times a day, people would comment on how young I looked. And, basically I would say, oh, I'm old enough to take that as a compliment was kind of my default answer. But then as we got into the actual campaign period, people were just directly, like explicitly asking me, how old are you? Which I was honestly surprised to get that at the door. And I felt like if that many people were asking me that explicitly, and it is a bit of a, I mean, in my view, it's a bit of a bold, maybe rude question. And so I felt like if that many people were actually explicitly asking it to me, how many other people were thinking it? And I guess I also just found it shocking because I'm not very young. Like I don't consider myself to be that young. We actually had, some really amazing under 30 candidates, some fabulous candidates in their 20s. But I mean, I'm 38. I'm not that young. And so for that to be what I was hearing again and again every single day. And so that day when I tweeted about it, so this had been going on, I mean, from the very start, from when I started canvassing. I think it then got a little bit, I was getting it more closer to the campaign period because I had stopped wearing a mask when I was canvassing outside. And so people could actually see my face. And so I got the question a lot more. And that day I had, we had done a 10 a.m. to noon canvass. And I was explicitly asked, not just generic comments about being young, but explicitly asked my age 4 times in that 2-hour canvass. And I was pretty frustrated. I mean, I have a lot of experience. Like I'm not good at tooting my own horn, but I do think, I have a wealth of experience in different sectors. And it just felt like the assumption at every door was that I was young and inexperienced. And I had to constantly start from that place from that assumption of kind of like, what are you even doing here? And I had to kind of, explain. I had to tell them that I'm 38. I had to list all my experiences before we could like start having a conversation about, issues and my platform and that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And it did seem like that was a double standard. And like I brought up Yasser Naqvi, who he's the MP in this riding, former MPP. And, he's a good friend. He campaigned a lot with me. And I had asked him, did you ever get asked how old you were? And he didn't. He was not asked that once. And he was actually younger than me when he first got elected. So, I think that shows that there is a bit of a double standard there in that he didn't have to kind of constantly make that case with people every day at the door.
Well, and I think so inexperience to me equals, unqualified. Mm-hmm. Because I think the common assumption is like, oh, you're not of a certain age, then, then like, why do you deserve to be in that space? Like, what have you done? But to your very, very valid point, Pierre Poilievre was 25 when he was first elected. Andrew Scheer was also 25. And then, so Pierre Poilievre, actually, because I went this morning and was checking out more about his bio. So he, after doing his BA at the U of C in international relations and commerce, he went directly into politics. Mm-hmm. So, according to this, so he went from, getting his BA to being an advisor to then Canadian Alliance leader Stockwell Day, and then was elected in 2004. So he has no private sector experience, mm-hmm. no public sector. Like he has political experience. Yeah. And I do think it's rather safe to say, I mean, maybe the odd time, maybe he got it a handful of times. I'm not sure. But for you to be asked so consistently and to Again, because for me, when someone says, oh, like, tell me about your experience, that to me says, okay, that I have to prove to you that I deserve to be here and that I'm qualified. And that is very gendered.
It is. And even that question is fine, right? Like I see a campaign as a job interview, right? And so I have no problem explaining my experience and talking about it. But that wasn't even the question.
Yeah.
The question wasn't, tell me about your experience. That would have been a much better question. The question was, how old are you? Or what it often was I would kind of start giving a bit of an overview of my experience and would be interrupted with a comment on how I looked too young to have done these things, which you're just like, I don't even know how to answer that. So it was frustrating.
Yeah. I mean, tell me about your experience is a much more diplomatic question. Obviously not as direct as tell me how old you are.
Yeah.
But it really should be about like, yeah, age, age does offer different experiences. But it's not the only thing that you're bringing to the table. So did you think, besides like having to develop your own key message to respond to that question, did you think about responding in any other way, kind of publicly, like making a joke about it, by like making a video, or did you discuss it with your campaign team?
Well, I mean, and that's sort of what I was getting at too, with the fact that even tweeting about it, we were hesitant to do it all because, again, the concern was that we were already spending too much time focusing on my age at the door, and I didn't want to be. I do have a lot of experience. I'm a deeply policy wonky person. I want to talk about the issues at the door and wanted to spend time talking about the issues. And so I was hesitant to bring it up at all. And I mean, you can see from the responses to that thread that even when I did bring it up, that then opened me up to a lot of additional criticisms, on, I got accused of basically playing identity politics and just saying that people should vote for me because I'm a woman, which I think is also a misogynistic argument, because it's also inherent in that argument is the assumption that I have no experience and that the only thing I have to offer is that I'm a woman, and I'm saying just vote for me because I'm a woman, which was never the case. So I think this is part of the challenge that women face, right? Is that we do face these challenges when we run for office, but then if you speak about them, that just opens you up to more criticism. So, and also it is because I was getting it so much at the doors. I mean, it was truly the number one thing I was asked. People, they didn't mean it in a sexist way. They didn't mean it in a malicious way. And so, I didn't, certainly wasn't going to respond in a rude way to people at the door. So I found, the kind of joke about, oh, I'm old enough to take that as a compliment, they kind of worked well. Usually it got a bit of a laugh, and then I could pivot to, so let's talk about some of the issues that are here for you. So.
Well, and so I went through and I have, well, let's go through some of the comments to your tweets. So someone said, to be fair, you were genuinely young. You are 19, LOL, which.
I think that was responding to somebody else in the thread who was saying that they got asked that at the doors. And they are 19, so, which is quite different than 38.
Yes. Okay. Let's see, where was one? If you're elected, the really tough questions will begin. Just people questioning you as if your experience isn't, someone saying, because they're genuinely curious. It's not malicious. That's fine. Ask other questions. To be honest, you look younger than 38. And while it doesn't matter, perhaps that's why you're being asked that. When I ran for office, I was asked that as well, and I was 36. I certainly thought it was a strange question, but they were potential constituents, so I just went with that. That it brings up an interesting, what's off limits? in terms of like, if we do treat it like that, and it is a job interview because you are asking people to vote for you, to put you in that job. But like, what questions are actually inappropriate?
Yeah. And it's also hard because you, as somebody who's running for office, you're trying to, win these people over. Like you're trying to have genuine conversations and earn their vote in these conversations. And so it is a challenging dynamic when you get questions at the door that you think are inappropriate. And I guess for the record, I mean, I'm not saying that questions about age should be off limits. It's just that it was, again, the number one question that I got, and that is what really shocked me. And it did make me feel, especially talking to, male candidates who were younger and who never once got that question, that it did feel like as a female candidate, I was starting from a different place in people's assumptions, right? That I do think that when men are on the ballot, there is this inherent understanding that they should be there,
that they're they're qualified.
Exactly, that they've automatically met some kind of like low bar of qualifications to be on the ballot. And so the conversation starts at a different point. Whereas for me, I guess I was just surprised, especially as someone who is, maybe a little bit young, but not really. I don't think 38 is very young. I do have a lot of accomplishments. And so I was surprised that the conversation really seemed to be starting so far back on like, it did seem like the inherent assumption was that I was young and inexperienced, and kind of like prove to me that you even belong on the ballot before then prove to me,
jump over this hurdle. Jump over the hurdle I have for you. Like, open the first door.
It just seemed like the assumptions were starting at different places, where I had also hoped to be starting in people's minds as like a viable choice on the ballot. And so let's talk about issues. Let's talk about my background and experience. Like, of course, those are fair games, and those are things I would have loved to talk more about. But instead, it seemed to be starting so far back. And it was funny, we did talk about this with my campaign team on like how, because it was so pervasive at the door that I was concerned, and I think rightfully so, that if this many people are asking these kind of questions directly to me, how many people are thinking about it? Like, how many people are just seeing my picture, assuming that I'm young and inexperienced, and not really giving me that time? And so, we thought about ways to, how do we make me seem older in campaign materials? But this brought up another, challenge, in that the obvious answer that we came up with to this was use family photos, like photos of me with my kids. That does, I think, inherently make me seem older in people's minds. But then that opens a whole other can of worms that women face. And these were also questions that I got at the doors of, well, how are you going to be able to do this job with 2 young kids? Like, what about your kids? What about your family? How are you going to be able to be a good mom if you're also an MPP? So it felt like this, being stuck between a rock and a hard place a little bit, and that you just kind of can't win either way. So.
Yeah. Well, this person said, take it as a compliment. People are too sensitive nowadays. If that hurts your feelings, maybe your career in politics is not the move. Okay.
And you would be surprised at how many people told me to take it as a compliment that I looked young. And even that was so frustrating, because I was like, I am not trying to win a beauty contest here. I am trying to get elected so that I can influence policies and make people's lives better. Like, it is not a compliment in my view. Any time spent talking about my appearance at all is not what I want here. Let's talk about the issues.
Yeah.
So
this one says victim mentality. Another one says, if you should succeed at becoming elected, the questions and comments you will have to face every day will be more pointed asinine and crass, then how old you are. It's not fair and it's not right, but it's a reality. Well, okay. He has a very interesting name on, that's a very, but like, why do we have to accept it as the way it is? Why can't, having conversations about, why you are qualified? We like where, show me the rule book of life where it says we just have to accept things the way they are. Because like literally nothing will change if we just keep going in that way. And at Election Boy, like honestly, the systems weren't designed for women. They weren't intended to ever accommodate women, to let alone elect women. So like, how can you help us as women, and anyone else who's underrepresented in politics, change that, rather than just being like, that's the way it is, deal with it?
Well, exactly. And, I certainly didn't, these questions didn't hurt my feelings. It was more just, it was genuine, like shock and surprise for me. Like this was just one of the things that I was not expecting going into this. And so, that's what we do on Twitter, right? When we're, have an experience that's kind of frustrating and we want to share it. And I think it was worth sharing, in all of those, there were a lot of those kind of comments. But there were also a lot of comments from other female politicians saying like, yes, I got asked this all the time too. And it was so frustrating. And, I talked a lot with the other women candidates in the party during the election. One of the candidates had put together this really wonderful, like women in politics weekly discussion for women candidates to kind of have a safe place to talk amongst ourselves about, the unique issues that we might be facing. And it was a pretty common experience across the board for them as well. So I think it's, bringing these things up, in my view, it was certainly not trying to bring it up to whine or complain. But I do think that there is a double standard there. And clearly, the results speak to the fact that there are barriers. I mean, we don't have gender parity in Queen's Park. We don't have gender parity in the House of Commons. So clearly there are barriers in place. And I think that this, to me, this felt like one of them. And it felt like it was worth it to name it and talk about it, especially because, like I said, I don't think that the people asking at the door, it wasn't coming from a place of maliciousness. And I think it speaks a lot to, our inherent biases that we don't even know that we hold when we just immediately see a picture of someone and make assumptions about how experienced they are or are not. And so I think it's just, especially with biases that we're unaware of, talking about it and pointing it out is how we become aware of them.
Do you see a role, or what role do you think political parties and politicians and the political system can play in addressing some of these issues so that we can have these conversations more broadly and openly? Or, is it the role of do you have any ideas or thoughts on how we can change the conversation?
I mean, it's hard. It is so, ingrained, like having gone through this process. There are some things that the parties are doing and they're definitely trying. So, for example, the Ontario Liberal Party did have over 50% women candidates, and it wasn't by chance, it was by design. That was an explicit goal, and they made it happen. I loved the Women in Politics weekly discussion that we had. It wasn't, it was the women candidates, but we also actually had like a coach on the call, someone who like does this for a living, and she was there as sort of offering support to us. So it was, it wasn't just kind of haphazard. It was really well thought out, and
Was that paid
structured.
for by the party then?
I'm not sure. I think so. I think it was, but
That's a
I should
really interesting
double
idea.
check. Well, yeah, it was. And honestly, it was very, very helpful because many of us were having, experiences like this, but also just the logistics of, trying to figure out how we were going to get through a campaign period with young kids and like how we were actually going to balance those things. And they were the kind of questions that I think some of us were, might have been a little bit insecure as first time female politicians, or didn't necessarily want to ask these questions in like our broader, to the whole broader group of candidates or even on our riding associations. So it was really helpful to have this kind of safe space for women candidates to talk about these issues. And for me personally, I found it very, very helpful. But is it enough? I mean, no, not nearly enough. And I truly don't think that there are any easy fixes here. I do think, we've talked about some of the negative encounters I had at the door. I also had so many incredible interactions with young girls in particular that just like absolutely like melted my heart and made every second worth it. And so we have to just keep stepping up and running and not being afraid to call these things out when we see it, even though that does just open you up to a whole other level of criticism for having called it out, that then you get accused of complaining and playing identity politics. But we do need to call it out, and we do just need to keep stepping up and running, because I think every time we do, you don't know who else, even if you don't win in the traditional obvious sense of winning the race, I think you never know who else you inspire. And actually, it's funny, talking to you, because I know you're based in Calgary. Just yesterday, I was going through my closet and found this old T-shirt from when Chris Turner, I don't know if you remember this, Chris Turner ran in a by-election in 2012 in Calgary Centre for the Green Party. And I was a huge fan of his. He's an amazing author, especially on sort of climate, but he's also done a lot of work on science and the role of science in our democracy. And I had a tiny involvement in his campaign back in 2012. And I was thinking about how much that inspired me at the time, that he stepped up and ran a really amazing campaign, and how that has continued to inspire me and no doubt played a role in me deciding to run a decade later. And so, I think it's such a great example of how just putting yourself out there on the ballot, running a campaign, you never know what kind of seeds that plants in other people's minds. So,
and you were endorsed by Catherine McKenna, who obviously is, a very famous and well-known Canadian politician, but also has been and continues to be the subject of, almost like violence in some ways.
Yeah.
Like specifically like targeted threats, as well as everything that she's subjected to online. It's just.
Well, and she faced and continues to face so much hate, but not even just that. It does feel like the vitriol has been ratcheted up. There was a story out just this week, because obviously I'm in Ottawa, and so we had been dealing with the Freedom Convoy, which I don't even like to call them that, in February, and kind of on and off, and it looks like they're planning to be back on Canada Day. And, MPs are under more and more threats. There was just a story out this week about how they were given kind of panic buttons in order to have on them in case that there is an issue. And so this is what I see as a huge crisis that we're facing right now, right? We already know that there's these barriers for women in particular, but then I think as the political space becomes more hostile all around, and we know that it's likely to be even more hostile towards women and minorities, like it's already a space that is not welcoming to those people, and it's only getting more toxic, which is just going to further put up additional barriers to those groups. And it worries me a lot, honestly. And it was part of why I decided to run, because I think the only way I can see us breaking it is continuing to have good people step up and run despite all of the potential downsides to it, and despite how challenging it can be. And then, much like, me seeing when Chris ran in 2012, when we see good people step up and run, we think, okay, maybe I could do that too if they did that. So that's all we really can continue to do.
Yeah. We do need more good people in politics, and the political climate right now, I unfortunately don't see it. I mean, as much as I want it to be better, it's evolving, and at a rapid pace. We still have, obviously not to the extent of the protests that you had in Ottawa, but we still have protests that happen here in Calgary, and some really big societal issues that we need to tackle, and some really hard conversations that we need to have. And unfortunately, I don't really see them happening. So, these things aren't, time is not going to be is not on our side. Like, I think that time is going to prove that these are going to be more difficult to unwind and to sort out, which is it's disappointing and frustrating, and a lot of other things.
I mean, I completely agree. A lot of my previous work before entering politics was around misinformation as a threat to our democracy. This was even like pre-COVID, and it's only grown exponentially as an issue and a real threat. So it is concerning, and there aren't any easy solutions. I do think the parties, like the actual parties and institutions, are going to have to step up and particularly look at what more they can do to support people who step up to run broadly, but specifically, women and people running from minority groups, especially in light of the fact that it's only going to get harder to do that, to step up from those groups. It's already been hard, and it's only going to get harder. I know that some of the female candidates from the Ontario Liberal Party are doing a bit of a kind of a separate debrief now on kind of assessing some of the ways, like the weekly meetings that we had, that the party did support us, but also in what other ways we were looking to be supported, like in what other ways we could have been supported. So when that comes out, I'm happy to introduce you to the folks leading that, and they would probably be more than happy to come on and kind of share what they've learned, because I think there is a lot to do. It's just, it's like you said, it's not easy. These are challenging times, and it looks like, it looks like it's going to get worse before it gets better. I hate like being too negative, but I think that is true. But can I also say that overall, despite coming on here to talk about some of the challenges and the kind of frustrating conversations that I just wasn't expecting to have at the door, that overwhelmingly the experience was a positive one, that we had a lot of fun. I absolutely loved the experience of running. Even running and losing, it was still, there's no question in my mind, it was a net positive experience. And so I would encourage anybody out there who's thinking of doing it to, give it some real consideration and jump in, despite some of these frustrations that you will inevitably have.
100%. We need more women in politics. We need more moms in politics. We need more, scientists in politics. We need, so many more people in politics. And so, thank you for running and for sharing your experiences. And it's sometimes I feel like in the space of women in politics, we want to focus on the positive things and all of the good things, and 100%. And I want to talk about those things, and I try to as well. But then there's also the things that I think that for a lot of women, they get into this, they run and then they're unprepared and they don't, and it's like, oh, I wasn't expecting this. And it's like, how can we do a better job of preparing you for these questions so that, unfortunately, until, we create this, a better system and a better ecosystem. And maybe people are asking, tell me about your experience instead of, how many kids do you have and who's going to be looking after them and how old are you? And does your husband agree with you doing this? And all of those questions that we all know that women get.
Yes.
So, yeah.
And that's just it, is that I wasn't like, I've been in political spaces. I've been involved in a lot of campaigns. So I very much felt like I knew what I was getting into, and it did just catch me off guard. I was not expecting it. And, it was nice. I actually went out for coffee with another female candidate who had been the same age as me the first time she ran, from a different party, but she reached out to me. We had coffee, and, she was sharing it that she had similar experiences, and that one of the first thing her campaign manager had done when she started working with her was like took her to the salon and asked for the most like old lady hairdo for her to, because she kind of knew that this was going to be an issue. And so kind of tried to address it by, getting an old lady haircut. So it is, it's certainly not a unique experience that I had, but it was one that I wasn't expecting, because I guess it is that additional challenge that women experience it and then also don't want to talk about it. But, there are ways to address it. If I ever run again, like it will be something that I consider more from the outset is, I guess, how do I make myself look older? Which is
but
not
like, do you
that I thought
do you really need to cut your hair to look older? Or like, can we, like, I don't want women and people to change their appearance or their names to be, more. And this actually was a conversation that I have had in real life where the feedback was, well, your name it was with someone I was working with. And they were like, your name is, we think it's too hard for people to say, pronounce, and, it sounds like basically foreign. So would you consider changing your name? And it's like, I was like, are you kidding me?
Yes, it's so frustrating.
Like, how about we change society?
Yeah.
Like, that's where I want to see the change.
No, exactly. But how do you change society, right? Like, how do you change everybody's minds broadly? Like it's hard to do, especially when you're dealing with, I think, pretty broad and ingrained biases, right? Towards women and towards, what we expect when we see a political candidate at our door. And does this person kind of match that expectations? So it takes a long time to get that change. So I think you kind of have to do a little bit of both. Yeah.
Well, like big questions that require big answers, big answers, and a lot of people to kind of keep having these conversations, and and to keep. It is possible. Like, I don't want to say it's not possible. I think it is possible. We just have to just have to keep doing the work. So
yeah, absolutely.
I really appreciate you coming on. So I have one last question for you, and it's like to end on a positive note. It's something I've started recently, which is asking everyone, because it's so easy to focus on the negative and to, to think about to go there so frequently. So I've started asking everyone at the end of the podcast what their superpower is. So what is your individual superpower, Katie?
That's a tough one. In the days after the election, when all your friends are kind of messaging you, one of my friends said that I had an indomitable spirit, which I thought was a funny way of putting it and not a way I would have described myself, but I think is accurate. I'm pretty just determined and willful and don't give up. And I think anyone who is in the change making space, you kind of have to have that spirit to you, because you have more losses than wins. It's just the way it is when you're trying to make change in the world. And so you kind of have to have an indomitable spirit. So I think that would be my superpower.
I like it. Well, thanks for sharing your experiences, and maybe I'm not sure what your political future looks like, but I hope it does. I mean, if you want it to include haircuts or not. But I wish you all the best, and I know the election really wasn't all that long ago, and so you're probably still coming off of it and
yes,
returning back to non-campaign life. So
it's hard to there's an adrenaline drop afterwards. It takes a little bit of getting used to kind of getting back to a regular pace of things. Yeah. But thank you so much for having me on. Like I said, I'm a huge fan, so it was a really honor to get to join you today.
No. Well, thank you, and all the best. And I'll keep watching and seeing what your future endeavors hold.
Awesome. Thanks so much.